Thank you again, Mr. Lineback. In an earlier time in this country, people tended to live closer together within their family, extended family units. Aunts and uncles, grandparents were mostly nearby. Since the 1960s, the term nuclear family started to take on a bigger meaning. The term nuclear family actually came into vogue in 1924. It showed up in books, but it really became popular much later with the industrialization and the prosperity of our society, economic freedoms that weren't there in previous times. So it became a relocation of many, many families. It became a part of life. Statistics show that 1 out of 5 families will move each year in this country. In a recent 5-year study from 2015 through 2019, it showed that about 44 million people packed up and moved to a different location in the country. So today's nuclear family isolation doesn't enjoy the same network of close-by extended relatives that it used to. Now add to that something called family estrangement. Family estrangement, it's on the rise. According to a Time magazine article, it's because of the mobility, the divorce rate, broader cultural freedoms that our ancestors didn't have. Now, estrangement, what that means is animosity towards one another, separation of family members because of some falling out between them, some disappointment, some long-term unresolved issues and resentment. So estrangement is not a good thing. It's a terrible thing. Family estrangement leads many to divorce. A June 2000 Heritage Foundation study, which is such a comprehensive study, it's still being quoted quite a bit on the internet. Heritage Foundation study titled "The Effects of Divorce on America." They identified beyond any doubt that the epidemic of divorce is destroying our society, in their words. Each year, over 1 million American children suffer the divorce of their parents. Moreover, half of the children born this year to parents who are married will see their parents divorce before they turn 18. Half of the children born in America right now. Studies show that the devastating physical, emotional, and financial effects that the divorce is having on these children will last well into their adulthood years and will affect the next generation and the next generation. Now here's another disturbing statistic. U.S. federal and state governments spend $150 billion with a B dollars each year subsidizing and sustaining single-parent families. By contrast, only $150 million is spent to strengthen American families. Let's put that in another way, easier to grasp. For every $1,000 spent to deal with the effects of family disintegration, $1 is spent to bolster and strengthen families. So more books are being written on the preservation of the ever-fragmenting family structure. And as traditions and cultural mores are being weakened from the tragedy of divorce, what's resulting is more transient lifestyles, more alternative lifestyles, emotionally disturbed children, or marriages just tossed aside for convenience sake. Can these kinds of trends in our society influence, to one degree or another, you and me? Can we be influenced by these trends? And what can we do to help strengthen our family bonds? Well, I'd like to share some ideas in this message on nurturing what could be called, quote unquote, healthy family rhythms, both in our personal families and in our church congregation that we lovingly call the West Michigan congregation. My title today is simply family rhythms. Family rhythms. Now, what do I mean by healthy family rhythms? Well, I borrowed that term from Dr. Phil McGraw, very well-known, nationally syndicated psychologist and author, has written many books. Dr. Phil, better known to many people, he talks about family rhythms. He says in his book, 2004 copyright, Family First, he says, life begins with a certain rhythm. He says, from birth on, healthy, nurturing families provide a certain rhythm of life through the ups and downs, their joys and occasional tragedies. Every family has a uniquely different rhythm, he says. On the one hand, you'll see a happy, well-adjusted family down the street in the neighborhood. The kids are on the front lawn, they're laughing after school every day, playing out in the front yard. On the other extreme, you'll see a family that has the unhealthy rhythms of a repetition of chaos, pain, stress, discord, lack of trust, lack of effort, and lack of proper knowledge on how to change those habits and patterns. Do you have a certain family rhythm in your family life? While we know there is no such thing as a perfect family, we chuckle about that every once in a while. Perfect parents and perfect families don't exist. They don't. But good rhythms can be summed up in one word: love. One word: love. On that note, please turn in your Bibles with me to Romans 12 and verse 9. It's just one of many passages I could have chosen to begin in this topic today. Romans 12 and verse 9 has to do with love, as Paul gives instructions to the church at Rome. He says, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Verse 10, Romans 12, verse 10, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfast in prayer. And then he goes on with more instruction from there. But esteeming others better than ourselves, being kindly and affectionate toward one another with brotherly love. These are very, very important aspects of the way to bolster and build the bonds within our families. So again, we joke about us coming from some level of dysfunctional family backgrounds. We do. I mean, I could think of relatives on my side of the family that I tell my wife once in a while, they don't have as nice and balanced lifestyles from my past. I'm talking about cousins. Those are no longer around anymore. But as my wife's family, when I met my wife and we got married, we'd go and visit her side of the family in the South. And they were just wonderful family unity. They had these big family reunions that were enormous. And the patriarchs of the family, the grandparents, would be in the photograph in the middle, sitting down, and all, 40 or 50, 60 people on the peripheral of them. And I said, wow, that is something I didn't grow up with. I thought that was wonderful. I loved it. I really, really loved it. And so, can you think of any perfect parent-child relationships in the Bible? There weren't many. Sometimes you could think of maybe the Father and the Son, God and Jesus Christ. There you go. That would be an easy one, of course. About maybe God and Adam and Eve in the very early days. We don't know how long before Adam and Eve broke God's law and were cast out of the Garden of Eden. But maybe they had a wonderful relationship before that happened. I mean, there are some better and some worse relationships in the Bible that we can learn from. Certainly there are. But there's always room for improvement in family rhythms to help people grow in love and joy and harmony. So I have 3 points to share with you today. Point number 1 out of 3 is on having a predictable pace of family life. Having a predictable pace of family life. Does life tend to be more unpredictable in your home, especially if you have kids, if you have little children or teens in the home? I mean, that's a given. There are always challenges when you're raising young ones. But add to that society stresses. There was the coronavirus for several years, flu and strep throat, the cost of living, or having a child come home from school with 3 Ds on his report card, or a child out driving that's gotten a flat tire on the interstate. And these are just crises that come along. They're unpredictable elements of life, just part of life. Now, some unforeseen events are pleasant surprises, some are inconveniences, and some are outright disasters in our lives. I mean, that's nothing new, right? Nothing new. In our modern age, stresses of life are compounded by society around us. There's growing anger, growing fear, tension around the world about a number of major issues, and they're serious issues. Pandemics to climate issues, climate crises, wars, mass displacement of populations in different countries, food and water insecurities. These are mounting, these are growing. These are not going to get better before Christ returns, as we know. And so in such contentious environments, these kinds of stresses can rub off on us to a degree with anger, fear of the unknown. Sometimes people can get very discouraged and very worn down by these things. But there are some principles that can certainly help us maintain predictability in our lives, whether we're raising a family or whether we're single, whether we're past child-rearing age. An important antidote to the stresses that we see around us in society is why we're here today on God's wonderful blessing of the Sabbath. Sabbath keeping in our families are among the times that we remember as bringing a sense of security. I'll quote several book titles in the remainder of this message, but none of them talks about Sabbath keeping, not a one. And yet we have this gift from God because God has called us to understand these things. And we're training now not only to receive today's blessings from the Sabbath and each week, but to teach it in the world tomorrow so that the entire world will enjoy the blessings of God's Sabbaths and his annual Sabbaths as well. So Sabbath keeping is one of those things that can bring us a sense of security. It's one of the constants that all of us that are called can depend on. And so every week we're given this mental and physical synchronization of our body clocks so that they don't drift off course. It brings us back in line with a synchronization. And many of us have discovered over the years that the Sabbath day is one of the strongest rhythms in family life. And that is by God's design. He designed it for all humanity. And so few people understand and grasp and practice it. Now, God created it. He blessed it. He set it apart just after he created Adam. I won't turn, but Exodus 20 and verse 11, a reference. Exodus 20 verse 11 says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." He didn't need rest. He did it to set an example and a pattern for humanity. He wasn't tired, but he made the day holy, the 7th day holy. And so it should be used for rest and worship and for resynchronizing our mental and physical clocks. In that same chapter, Exodus 20, back 2 verses 8 through 10, God said, "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates." Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of Sabbath keeping, but this was servile work. This was the routine work that could be done the other 6 days of the week. And of course, there's a place for feeding animals that are in your care. There's a place for cooking and preparing meals. There's a place for even picking vegetables out of the garden if you're going to eat them, not to harvest and stockpile, but to eat them. So there are things that God put in place to make the Sabbath a joy and not a burden at all. Please do turn with me to Isaiah 58, verse 13. We're still on this first point of making our family rhythms predictable. Isaiah 58, verse 13. As you're turning, the Sabbath teaches us time management, in addition to many blessings. Because many people who have a healthy Sabbath routine have found that when they made the tough choices when they were first being called, or when young people are going off on their own and they're being pressured by many pressures in society around them, that once they made these firm commitments to keep God's Sabbath holy, they would have more productive weeks, they would find more blessing, God would fill in the gaps to give us that serenity and the predictability that we need. Isaiah 58, verses 13 and 14. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. There is a delight to be had for people who make it their pattern, their routine, becomes so predictable in their lives. After a few years, it becomes so second nature to stop for the Sabbath and enjoy it. And the last verses of Isaiah 66 I won't turn to, but it shows us that in the millennium, the entire world will learn to honor God from Sabbath to Sabbath and new moon to new moon. Now, we don't have a command in the Bible to keep new moons, so there's something in the future that God has put in place for a future time. But the Sabbath to Sabbath, it says the whole world is going to honor God, the whole world. And you and I are in training to teach the nations how to do it, So Sabbath keeping is a very healthy routine. And predictability and routine has a settling and calming effect on us. Now, what's the difference between a routine and a rut? Well, there's a huge difference. A rut is where you are in a wagon in the old days and you get stuck in a crevice in the mud and you can't get your wagon out. Or in modern days, it's when your car is stuck in a snowdrift and you're spinning your wheels and they're digging deeper and deeper as you're trying to get out of it. That's a rut. A routine is so different. A routine is when we get out on the streets and we figure out how to beat the traffic lights so that we get them timed just right. That's a good routine. Or we set our alarm clocks to the right time that you want to get out of bed, or your smartphones do a much better job than some clocks that are at the mercy of power outages or mechanical wind-up. I grew up with a mechanical wind-up clock for the first few years, winding it, and you usually said when you were late for school, my clock stopped. Well, it's hard to make that excuse. I mean, if it was a sincere excuse. It's even hard to make that when you have a smartphone that wakes you with a nice little chime if you said it that way. So routines are good. Routines are good. Flexibility is a healthy thing, but we all even need routines in our lives. We need routines in our lives. It keeps us organized and operating more efficiently. It brings us a sense of security. When our families try to have certain meals at predictable times, this is something that's a little harder in the summertime. My wife and I are trying to make sure that we stay on some kind of a evening meal practice, where in the winter it's so easy. 6 o'clock, it's already pitch dark outside. Now it's light till 9 o'clock at night, sunset. Yes, we're going to try to keep up a routine on meals at predictable times. It's a good routine. And so routines are good, just like the Sabbath routine is good. Now back to Dr. Phil McGraw for a moment. He explains in his book titled Family First that having a schedule for some activities is important. Here are a few ideas on a regular weekly routine, as much as can be planned, he says. Set specific times for family meals together. Set specific times for children to do their homework after school or if they're homeschooled. Establish TV time, internet time, exercise time, play time, study time, and even prayer time. These are healthy routines. And they vary from family to family and the age of the group in the family. They vary a lot. But the bottom line is predictability, constancy in a family are good, cohesive dimensions in family life that people can come to depend on. And again, they give you a framework of security when we have routines in our lives. So point number 1 out of 3 is we all need some routine and some predictability in our family lives. It has a calming effect on our stress and anxiety. And the Sabbath is, by God's design, one of the most powerful rhythms in our lives. And again, one day, all nations will rejoice in the Sabbaths God has designed for humankind, and they will delight in them, just like we do here today. Point number 2 out of 3. We need traditions to bring constancy and meaning to our lives. We need traditions. What kind of traditions do you have in your family? We try very hard every year to separate our young children, especially, from worldly traditions. All the holidays, all the pagan holidays, especially around Christmas, but even include Valentine's Day, Easter, Halloween, and others. And so those are of course, counterfeits that Satan tries to distract humanity from knowing God's plan of salvation through his holy days. And they're all false anyway. They're based on false premises. But now we try to keep them from those things, but we build on the proper traditions. This last Tuesday, I didn't mention this in my announcement, certainly a number of you were very, very concerned about the tornadoes that passed through not far from here, between Portage and Battle Creek. I think there was an 11-mile track, and it was the worst since 1980. If any tornado that came through back then, it was Kalamazoo that did quite a bit of damage in downtown Kalamazoo. And so we're contacting one another through our network on Messenger, and we're seeing that everyone is safe, and we're very, very thankful for that. At our house, not everyone's house, but our house, the power went out for about 3 hours. That's not a long time. They expected power to come on maybe 8 or 10 hours later, but it came on much faster. I was thankful. But in that 3-hour period, your mind starts to imagine getting creative. You say, okay, what if I'm out of power into the night? What can I do with my time? What can I do that's productive now? Now it was in the middle of the day. Up in our house in Delton, there was nothing but a slight wind and a little bit of rain during the tornadoes. Not so in Portage. It was a severe event. But what I'm saying is when the power goes out, you start to think, we're so used to all the technology that we have around us. Oh, I don't even have my computer on. My cell phone did work. And Angela was in Ohio. We could communicate very easily, and we could text one another here in this neighborhood, in this area. So I'm very thankful for that. But without technology, we have to learn to become creative in those times. And there could be more prolonged times in the future. This past yesterday was May 10th. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, issued a rare alert that we were talking about that gave us the beautiful sights of the aurora borealis. Even up in this area, But this is the first of its kind since 2003 that had struck the Northern American area that could have and might still interrupt a lot of the power grid or other telecommunications. It could. They're still looking at the possibilities of this, and we're not out of the woods yet. But these kinds of things can happen on more frequent basis. We don't know. But all I'm saying here is that we have to fill those times with some creative imagination to go back 100 years for a few hours and see what life was like before electricity. Think of some activities you might do with a family or at any time, not just when the power goes out. Do you remember the things that you tend to do that bonded your family closer together? Are they the times that you sat down and played cards together as a family? Did some gardening together? Are they the times you got into a small fishing boat together, mom and dad and the kids, or the grandkids? Is it a time when you played putt-putt golf together, or got in the kitchen and did something creative? You did some canning, you made refrigerator pickles, you made some candles, or something like that in the kitchen. Some families even play musical instruments together as a family. I didn't grow up with musical instruments in the family sphere, but some families do that, and I think it's wonderful. I watch families, kids and adults and grandparents all sitting around a circle and playing guitar and banjo and whatever else they're doing, and I think this is wonderful. I love watching that. I love watching it. So in the church, some of our most important family rhythms are, as we have just seen, our Holy Day experiences. With our spiritual family, we have Night to Be Much Observed. We have tonight's potluck meal together. We have in-home visits. We have once in a while the blessings of children and marriages and baptisms and graduations. Those are wonderful traditions, and we need those in our lives. We need them. They're tremendously rewarding. So by definition, family traditions or rituals even, are things that are repeated, deliberate, and that have meaning. They're meaningful, they're deliberate, and they're repeated. The power of traditions is found in their repetition. Again, the power of traditions is found in their repetition. In today's society, there's so much family brokenness, emotional distancing, family member estrangement that I mentioned, diversions, distractions, these kinds of things break families apart. So having and reinforcing traditions is so important, and handing down stories, handing down beliefs, handing down godly customs act like glue over the years to your family. They act like glue. Social scientists say that without family rituals and traditions, a very crucial part of family development takes place. Children are more likely to develop behavioral problems. More conflict can be seen in the home. There will be less stability, and the same instability that can result in a church setting without a constant, predictable routine. But we have a wonderful and very healthy group here, and I often take the moment to say thank you to all who have such enjoyable fellowship. I've mentioned this numerous times already, but every weekend I do a quick, short report, and I give Mr. Hanisco the number of people who were present, whether or not there were any anointings, what the titles of the messages were. At the very bottom, I write one paragraph. I'll say, this Sabbath was another delightful Sabbath of joy and peace and harmony. People stayed long and fellowshiped and enjoyed each other's company. There was a lot of laughter. I'm sure he reads that bottom paragraph and he says he probably thinks I'm copying and pasting, but no, I do change it up a little bit. But it's pretty much routine. So I tip my hat to you. Okay, so point number 2 was we need traditions, which are the very fabric of our lives, to bring meaning to our lives, and the power of traditions is found in their repetition. Point number 3 out of 3, a little longer than the first 2. just a little longer. Number 3 is the all-important area of healthy family communication. Healthy family communication. Sadly, the majority of families in society become problem-oriented or problem-driven. If all we talk about are problems in a family setting, then we can expect problem relationships. Dr. Phil McGraw says, don't just communicate when there's trouble or when you're upset with one another. Don't just use those occasions for communication. Dr. Phil's clinical research shows that the amount of trouble kids get into is inversely proportional to the number or the words spoken in the home. What this means is the less we parents talk in the home, including our children, the more trouble our kids get into outside the home. Therefore, we need to encourage active communication with our families. It's a very interesting study that the more families just talk about different things, and certainly trying to look at and focus on the positive, the things that are good and uplifting and edifying, that there is stronger unity with the young people growing up in the home. And it is said that beautiful communication is like a lovely partner dance and like a harmonious duet. I didn't make that up, promise you. Please do turn to Psalm 113, verse 1 with me. Psalm 113, verse 1. Here it does describe how the best communication is sort of like an art form. Sort of like an art form. There are a number of passages in the Bible that capture this image beautifully. Not so much dancing in a duet, but read with me this psalm written by David. Psalm 113, verses 1 through 3. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down the edge of his garments. It is like the dew of Hermon, descending upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forevermore. In your mind, you're probably singing the melody from our songbooks. I am too. I am too. So anyway, this is just the imagery here. It was a fabulous celebration when a high priest was anointed and then the oil was dripped over his head. And it does look kind of messy, dripping down his beard onto his garments. But I mean, it was like, no, it was not just a little dab on the head. It was pouring the vial of oil in that anointing experience, according to what we're reading here. But David looks at it as a very joyous, how good and how pleasant occasion. Turn now, please, to Proverbs 25, verse 11. It's one of the very first passages I memorized when I first came into the church at age 17. It was just so simple. Proverbs 25, verse 11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold on a setting of silver. Picture a beautiful, polished silver platter where someone who is a craftsman of metal has fashioned that platter and put golden apples on it. And it's just something that shines and glitters. And so a word fitly spoken is described that way. Over to Proverbs, or back to 15, verse 23. Proverbs 15, verse 23. A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. A word spoken at the right time and the right place to encourage, to uplift, to bring cheer to others, to warm other people's hearts, how good it is. Isaiah 52. Let's hold a place in Proverbs. I'll come back here one more time. Let's go back to Isaiah 52, verse 7, please. Or over to Isaiah 52, verse 7. Again, this speaks to those who bring positive words and how powerful they are. Isaiah 52, verse 7. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things. And it means who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Well, this describes an ancient young runner who would go from village to village bringing some news. And that was the fastest, that was probably fast, unless you could get a galloping horse. But it was probably very easy and low cost to just hire young fellows that like to run and hand them a parchment and say, you run between these 5 villages and I'll pay you, a little token amount or whatever it was. And you go do this. But a swift runner who would take news from faraway places. Now, for most of human history, fast news could travel either by a galloping horse or by maybe a homing pigeon or by a fast runner. Not until 140 years ago now did the telegraph get invented. It was 1861, the telegraph, and it was a very short distance. I think it was from New Jersey to New York. But it was a sensation, and of course with the industrial age and the expansion of the railroad, then they could start putting all these mail bags on trains and take them all the way from New York to California. For a short while, for 18 months, there was the Pony Express. Very, very short. Now it's relegated to this folklore of Western life in the 1800s, but for a very short while, there was the Pony Express. That was in 1861. I apologize. The telegraph was invented in 1844, but it had not stretched across the Plains states. But the Pony Express went from Missouri to California in 10 days. There were numerous stops, but it took mail and multiple riders and multiple horses and stations. Still, 10 days was guaranteed from Missouri to California, Sacramento, California. It only lasted 18 months, but it was a fascinating short period of American history. Now we have all kinds of means of fast, instant telecommunication, satellite, TV, radio, internet. And now along with it is a lot of negativity that comes along with that technology, a lot of things that are not healthy and wholesome for our consumption. Who are our swift-footed messengers that can bring good tidings of peace? We can start with our own families and homes. We can start with our own families and homes. In a book titled Crucial Communications, I have on the shelf at home, it was by Carrie Patterson, copyright 2002. The author explains, it is an ideal to put aside all contention in a family. It's an ideal, it's a goal, but in truth, everyone has differences on important issues. Everybody does. There will always be a difference in opinion. Not all families cope the same way with them, though. Not all families break down when there's differences in opinion in families. Some handle those things much better than others. When 2 noted marriage counselors examined couples in the throes of heated arguments or discussions with each other, they learned that people fall into 3 different categories. This according to 2 counselors who researched and cataloged their results. One category was those who digress into threats and name-calling. So the author of this book, Crucial Conversations, calls that violence in communication, threats and name-calling. Then there's a category of those who revert to silent fuming, go their separate ways. They won't talk to each other. They're too proud to break down and say they're sorry. They won't talk to each other for days. They'll call that the silence syndrome in communication. And then there's a third category, those who speak openly, honestly, and respectfully. And the author, Carrie Patterson, in her book says, that's what she calls safe communication. Safe communication. Healthy, healthy, constructive, and breaking down the animosity and allowing two people or families to speak with respect toward one another. People who are skilled at communication do their best to make sure it's safe for everyone in the conversation to speak, to contribute their pool of ideas, even if they're not the most sound and maybe they're a little bit on the kooky or quirky side. Let them speak. Let them say what they're going to say. A skilled communicator will keep a constant watch on whether everyone in the conversation feels safe. I'll get into that a little more here. You find in well-planned negotiations in business, board meetings, discussions between labor and management, between unions and corporations, in counseling sessions, the stakes are often very high. And you don't want to break down in dialogue. So the moderators become very skilled at making sure that the conversations don't break down when those stakes are that high. What about in the family? Well, we're not doing this on a professional basis, but we can become more skilled at making sure there's safe communication. When topics are crucial, high risk, sensitive and emotional, we set the stage before we launch into the most sensitive topics in a marriage or in a family. We make sure that everyone feels safe, that we make sure that our mate or our children or our other relatives in the conversation can know that we care about what they say and we care about them. We care about their goals, their objectives, their interests, and their feelings. And when you have safe communication in a family and in a home, you can talk about just about every subject without somebody getting upset or frustrated or angry. When a conversation is safe, you should be able to listen to every side, an opinion, an idea that comes forth. Doesn't mean they're all good. Doesn't mean that's what you're going to end up doing. It's just a matter of improving listening skills. In another book titled We Can Work It Out, Making Sense of Marital Conflict, the authors are Notarius and Markman, copyright 1993. Notarius and Markman, the two counselors, said after observing dozens of couples in their relationships over a period of 10 years, the two counselors predicted the relationship outcomes. Sure enough, they had predicted nearly 90% of the divorces that occurred after spending time with couples watching how they communicate. They cataloged them and they predicted 90% of those whose marriages were not going to last if they stayed on that pattern, stayed on that path. Over time, couples who found a way to state their opinions about crucial or emotional issues honestly and respectfully, they're the ones that remained together. They're the ones that were successful. And those that did not, their marriages broke up. In a close relationship, people are vulnerable. They say that we can be hurt the most by the people that we love the most. It's just a vulnerability of being in a close relationship. And this is especially true when we talk about crucial issues. And every family has crucial issues to talk about. When you love somebody, things matter much more. Your feelings can be hurt at a deeper level than with people on the outside of your relationship. The ones we love the most are capable of hurting us the most, and vice versa. Something just always to keep in mind as far as developing and nurturing safe communication. It takes time to unlearn habits that we collect from society around us. Remember, we are influenced to some degree by culture and society around us. And we can learn good communication skills to make all relationships better. Please turn back to Proverbs 15 and verse 1 with me. Proverbs 15 and verse 1. A wonderful axiom here, verses 1 and 2. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. So a soft answer turns away wrath. Verse 4, Proverbs 15, verse 4, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. And verse 18, Proverbs 15, verse 18, a wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger allays contention, or puts aside contention. So the goal is to work on a tendency to retaliate in kind in our relationships. We work on examining our own personal knee-jerk reactions at times. Tendencies we might have that break down communications before we can resolve issues. We all have hot buttons, and they can be a source of frustration, embarrassment, or humiliation later if our hot buttons get pushed and we don't know how to manage those things and we have knee-jerk reactions. Sometimes we just have to say, time out, I don't feel safe in this conversation. That's something that I don't know if we think about that often, but you can do that in your family. Time out, I don't feel safe in this conversation. Doesn't mean you don't go back to it because you still have problems to resolve. It's just you might need a period to stop and think about how things are said, how things are done, with what kind of emotions you bring to the table. 1 Peter 2 and verse 21. I only have two passages to share with you left. 1 Peter 2 and verse 21, if you'd like to join me there. 1 Peter 2, verses 21 through 23. How did Jesus Christ respond when he was reviled, slandered, and ridiculed? And through much of his life, because Satan was dogging him, distracting him, trying his best to deceive him, to destroy him, that Jesus Christ's temperament to withstand all those stresses were just amazing and remarkable, if you think about it. 1 Peter 2, verses 21 through 23, for to this you are called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that you should follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he committed himself to him who judges righteously, meaning God is the equalizer. Put it in God's hands. If there is something that cannot be resolved, many situations in this life will not be resolved in our lifetime. When it can't be done, we put it in God's hands. Sometimes that time in our own families, in very difficult conversations, you break and you say a prayer together. You say a family prayer, or you go off individually and say a prayer and ask for God's input, God's understanding, God's temperament on us to help us through situations. Mutual respect is always necessary to make it through crucial conversations. Because as people perceive that their respect has been violated, consider it's like this. I heard this analogy once before. Respect is like oxygen, the air we breathe. You don't think about breathing constantly when you're sitting where you are, but you take your breath away, suddenly that's all that matters. All that matters right now is your breath. Same with personal respect. When someone's taken your respect away and humiliated you in a conversation, all of a sudden nothing else seems to matter except gaining your respect back. It's just that way. It's like the air we breathe. When you take it away, that's all you'll think about. So again, it's about healthy, wholesome conversation. Let's turn to one last passage together in Ephesians, please. Ephesians 4 and verse 29. Ephesians 4, verse 29. As you're turning, families show healthy communication when they respect each other's opinions Not again necessarily that they agree with what they have to say, but they respect them. And that makes conversations safe, brings them into a safe zone. Ephesians 4, verses 29 through 32. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification. We're talking about foul language, derogatory language, condescending language, ridicule, slander, spiteful things, things that will tear other people down. That they impart grace toward the hearers, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Verse 31, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. So point number 3 was about the all-important area, or art, if you will, of healthy communication. Before I close, just a thought about loyalty. In a really successful family, family comes first. Loyalty to the members of the family is critical in ensuring that smooth family rhythm. Our primary sense of belonging comes from family relationships. Husbands and wives and children, they should find their homes a refuge, a safe place, if you will, and a fortress against the negative pulls of society around us, because those pulls are getting worse and worse with every passing year. Sadly, in homes, a lot of times, family members are on their worst behavior. They let down and they don't have the same, shall we say, courtesies that they would with outsiders. And they should be sanctuaries, people's homes. So loyalty begins in the home. Loyal family members make sacrifices for one another. They do stick up for one another and they support one another in front of others. Friends are precious and dear, but you only have one physical family. And you have one spiritual family as well, and they count a lot. They count a great deal. When Dr. James Dobson, he retired now, but he was in charge of Focus on the Family for many years. He's written many books. He did a survey of more than 600 people who agreed to speak candidly to a younger generation on successful methods for happy marriages. They came to 3 important recommendations. Dr. James Dobson called them the 3 C's. 1, a Christ-centered home where Jesus Christ is always a guest at the table. He's always there in the midst. A Christ-centered home was number 1. And he's always involved with family prayer and overall behavior. The second C, having a commitment to continually work together through the years. And again, these were advice, the 3 C's of advice given by more seasoned parents and couples that wanted to pass something along to the younger generation. Have a commitment to continually work together. Number 3, have healthy and safe communication. So a Christ-centered home, committed to work together through the hard times, through the challenge of the crises, and then have healthy communications. So to reiterate, point number 1 was having a predictable pace of family life, a steady rhythm to bring stability and routine into our world. Number 2 was having traditions, that bringing constancy into our lives and meaning into our lives. And point number 3 was about the all-important area of safe and healthy communication in our homes and families. There are rhythms of life that bring a sense of well-being and traditions that bring stability. There will be traditions in the millennial age as well, because human beings are social creatures that need reference points, and traditions and routines bring these about. Hopefully you're finding your rhythm within your family at home. Find your rhythm with your spiritual family which is right here in this congregation. Water it, nurture it, and your family relationships will grow with strength and beauty.